The Bar Association of Sri Lanka has been at the forefront of driving an agenda for constitutional reform and economic recovery. If you haven't seen their proposals, I strongly urge you to have a look. While I broadly support the reforms they propose, I disagree with their premise that these can somehow take place only within the framework of a so-called interim government of national unity, even while Gotabhaya Rajapaksa remains as president. The BASL estimates that this can go on for as long as 15 months. But in my view, no government that has Mr Rajapaksa as president, and therefore heading the cabinet, however good that cabinet might be, can succeed. What credibility will such a cabinet have in the eyes of the people? Mr Rajapaksa has managed in just 30 months to ruin Sri Lanka's economy. He has driven the country's agricultural sector, on which millions of livelihoods depend, into the ground. He has squandered the country's foreign exchange reserves. He has recklessly printed trillions of rupees, causing an inflationary cycle that will take years to dampen. One of my recent videos drew some flack because I suggested that Mr Rajapaksa be offered a dignified exit. Some people didn't like that. But in the events of the 9th of May, he squandered that opportunity. The best he can expect now is a safe exit. So Mr Rajapaksa, in the words of Shakespeare, stand not upon the order of your going, but go at once. Or if Shakespeare happens not to be your preferred author, may I recommend Cromwell. You have sat here too long for any good you have been doing. In the name of God, go. The existing constitution has got ample provision for dealing with a presidential resignation. The next actual president will be elected by Parliament, by secret ballot. Parliament must also select the next Prime Minister. If the new government under the new Prime Minister can't secure a two-thirds majority for constitutional reform, Parliament can ask for a dissolution, for fresh elections. But I doubt whether the vote to a majority will have the appetite for a general election at this point. They'll help to keep an interim government in office for as long as it suits their purpose, which I suspect will not be very long. This is because the new government will soon become unpopular. It will be required to administer some very strong medicine. Money will have to be found to pay public sector salaries and keep essential services operational. But the country is bankrupt and domestic government borrowing is already at an all-time high. Any further government borrowing will probably push interest rates to more than 25%, making commercial credit unaffordable and driving down private sector growth. So the government will be forced to print more money, driving inflation to new heights. At least for the next several years, there really is no way of hopping off this inflationary escalator. The new government will have to do a bunch of things that almost everyone will hate. To try to balance the budget, they'll have to cut public spending and double taxes. This risks crippling the private sector, which is already struggling. Much needed structural reforms will require state-owned enterprises to be privatized, and this will attract the anger of unions and traditionalists. Public holidays will have to be slashed, wage increases will have to be capped, government recruitment will have to stop altogether. More people will sink below the poverty line. Meanwhile, prices will continue to rise and shortages of essential goods will persist. And then there are those who don't want to engage with the IMF. So the new government will have to invest all its energy in negotiating this politically toxic minefield. It will be trapped in this snare from day one. Having to face all these difficult decisions, so fraught will the political environment become that I doubt if the so-called interim government of national unity will last even 6 months. Sri Lanka is now like a cancer patient who has been given the choice of painful chemotherapy or a comfortable death in palliative care. Chemotherapy hurts. Your hair falls out, you vomit, your body aches, you get depressed. But with a little luck, you defeat your cancer and live happily ever after. We must recognize that public support for the interim government will evaporate as soon as it starts administering the chemo. The next government is not going to be popular. So I propose that what the BASL calls the interim government's common minimum program be gazetted as soon as possible and put to a referendum. In any case, we'll probably need a referendum to approve the constitutional reforms. None of this should take more than 3 or 4 months. Because without a clear mandate from the people, protests and strikes will break out once more, making the country ungovernable and paving the way for extremists and political opportunists to exploit a fresh crisis. If they are as wise as we expect them to be, the next president and prime minister will be very reluctant indeed to accept office. There's a parliamentary tradition that when a speaker is elected, he or she is taken by the arms and dragged forcibly to the speaker's seat. We inherited this curious custom from Westminster, where speakers have historically feared having to convey bad news from the House of Commons to the king, to the sovereign. I think we'll now have to perform this ritual also for the next Prime Minister. There are many people who claim that if only we knew how to ask, the world will come to our aid and somehow present us with the billions of dollars we need to pay our debts and start afresh. They imagine that generous donors will club together to help us out, like Santa Claus. This, of course, ain't gonna happen. But people point to the Marshall Plan that helped Germany rebuild its economy after the devastation brought about by the Second World War. As you probably know, this massive aid program, the Marshall Plan, was given to Germany despite it having declared war on America. So perhaps what Sri Lanka needs to do to get some cash is to declare war on the United States. Then, when we lose, the Americans will help us rebuild our economy. Sounds tempting, no? But then again, what happens if we win?